I want to get started by telling you a little bit more about myself and what I'm doing here today. And really, basically, I see this as a conversation, discussion about faculty roles and how those are really changing. And I absolutely think that they are. I've been a faculty member for over 30 years and in administration for the last 11, working with faculty both on my campus and other campuses. I've worked with four-year liberal arts institutions, private. I've worked at public and worked with public institutions, and I've also worked with highly specialized institutes or institutions. So graphic design, Otis College School of Graphic Design is one that I most recently had experience with. And at each place I've had this conversation about what faculty think about their roles and how they think those roles are changing themselves. What it is you can see yourself in terms of the day-to-day, and how long you've been at this and what you've noticed in terms of changing over the last few years. So what are some of the things that you've noticed? And it might be as you describe your faculty role in one word, but feel free to elaborate on more than one word. So what are some of the things that you've noticed about faculty roles?
Well, for one thing, I think we're for the first time trying to implement a form of faculty government, and we're not sure what that form is.
Right.
I think it's not sure.
Absolutely. So faculty at every institute, any kind of institution, are trying to figure out what it means to govern, what it means to come to some kind of agreement about what the goals are of the institution, how faculty contribute to those, and in many instances lead the way. So, yeah. What other?
My dean's just given us a lot more control. He says the accreditation board wants it to come from the teachers rather than the staff that's in charge of the teachers. So.
Right, and accreditation we're going to talk somewhat about today in particular. Yeah.
I think that schools have changed. Your more traditional schools have worked one way, and what we have in a lot of non-traditional schools, this is a non-traditional school. So therefore, the goal is to give a product to the students, and then I believe the faculty was not the primary thought. I think that came afterwards. And so there's a little bit of work that needs to be done to reconcile the faculty role into the overall mission of the school. And that's not anybody's fault, but that's just the way the non-traditional school was formed. And since most of the faculty in the non-traditional schools are part-time, that is another thing that needs to be reconciled as well.
Yes, I think one of the things that you're pointing to, several of the things that you're pointing to, the real differences between traditional and non-traditional institutions are spanned by our accrediting agency, WASC, right? So the accreditation agency, the regional agency for this area, attempts to do just that, and certainly in their fold or their framework, there are institutions that are long-time traditional and ones that are anywhere from long-time non-traditional to brand new. And WASC is itself growing and trying to reconcile that and figure out what that means in many respects. But I think a framework that they've given us in terms of the standards, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, is one that does actually serve as a good umbrella for understanding both kinds of institutions, because they get down to many times the key essential components of any institution to make a learning environment and make that effective. So if you had to do this task up here and sum up your role, the key thing that you do or feel that you're primarily contributing to, what would it be? One word. How about you?
I teach.
Teach? Yep.
Facilitate.
Pardon me?
Facilitate.
Facilitate. Okay, great. What were you going to say? How about you? Curriculum development, yeah. How about you?
I was like teaching, but you demonstrate?
Okay, so demonstrating, yeah, showing, illustrating. How about you?
I was going to say facilitate as well.
Mm-hmm.
Leadership?
Leadership, very good, yeah.
Educate.
Mhm.
How I inspire.
Okay, very good, yeah.
Mentor.
Enter. How about this block here?
Took all the good ones.
Yes.
Did all
I'd
good.
say almost.
We did.
The
Provide understanding.
Mhm.
Exploration into alternative teaching methods.
Very good, okay.
Facilitate.
Mhm. Any other words pop up? All right.
Guidance?
Pardon me?
Guidance?
Guidance, yeah.
Mentor.
Yeah. Mentor is a big, huge one, I think. What you'll see on this next one is a Wordle that was produced by a group of faculty, which I use, who came up and, Wordles are created by the most frequent thing. And learning pops up, but so does teaching, as well as the kinds of things that you're talking about, development, mentorship, advising, support. Also technologies, for you especially, I think technologies and what that means in terms of teaching, media, all of those keywords are ones that constantly are part in the substance of what it is we do. And with that comes a whole new set of considerations as we think about, what it means in today's modern classroom. All right, so how many people in here think that teaching is somewhat of an art? Yeah. Okay, I'm glad I'm not trying to convince most of you. What makes it an art?
You adapt to your environment and adjust accordingly.
Okay, yeah. Have to be fast thinker on your feet. Yeah. What else? Mhm.
There's no right way to do it.
Absolutely, there's no right way. You can tell that if you have 3 or 4 different really good teachers in a classroom of students, right? They respond very differently to each faculty who is unique in the way they present and the styles that they adopt. So absolutely, that kind of creative inspiration and ability to bring, that kind of strategy to the classroom. Yeah, what else? What else makes it an art?
It's never complete. It's always a work in progress.
Yeah, what do you mean?
I mean that in each class that you teach, you bring in new material, you figure out the student body and how they're engaged or not engaged, and you never have the exact structure because it's always changing and you're always adapting.
Yeah, I have occasionally come across folks outside of faculty groups who think of faculty as lecturing from the same tired notes they adapted, or constructed 20 years ago, right? But in fact, all of the faculty that I work with, I've never come across anyone who doesn't in some way revise their class on an ongoing process. And in most cases, that means considerable revisions when called for. You can get into the midst of something and discover right in the middle of it that you're, golly, what you thought was going to work just isn't. Or the way that you had structured or designed something isn't. And how can you tell? Well, if you're halfway connected to your students, you can tell. They'll tell you loud and clear. Everyone has had the experience, at least I know I have as a faculty member, I've talked to a lot of faculty who do, where you really think that you've designed a problem in such a way that it's going to be very engaging, and then you see in the midst it's really not. Something isn't working, people give you feedback. And being able to do what you said, adapt quickly and respond to that, and come up with other creative alternatives is a big part of the art of teaching. I put up 3 words here: engagement, leadership, and creativity. And you got at engagement right away, especially in terms of thinking of teaching as an art form. But engagement comes out too, leadership comes out too in what you said before. You often act as a mentor, as an advisor to your students. You guide them in the projects that they develop. That too is part of the whole process of learning. And finally, creativity. I think this is a huge aspect that we sort of don't always give ourselves credit for. How how many of you have had the experience of having students come to you outside of class and say, wow, what you said today really made me think of this other thing. Could I use what you said here to do that over here? If you've had students question you on that basis, you've connected. You've had them think beyond what it is you've given them and apply it in a new context. And it may seem inconsequential at the time, but I want you to start paying attention to those moments, because those moments are cues for you that you have indeed engaged them beyond the classroom, beyond what it is you've just brought to them. And so that brings into the counterpart of teaching, what students bring to the classroom too. But before we leave, talking about teaching, I want to talk about sort of the traditional views of, let me see something. It looks like not all my slides are, do I have a technician in the room? I have I'll have to draw it. I have there is a slide piece that's missing here. Let me draw it. It's a big round circle, cut up like a pie. Here's teaching. Here's professional work. And here's service. And I talked with you about WASP being an accrediting framework that really helps us understand overall how institutions might be put together. They use this kind of a framework, which, can you see that? Can you see that at all? Teaching, professional work, and service. How that's defined is in a large part left up to the institution. Now, there are standards and there are criteria for review, and when you went through your last accreditation visit and application process, that is indeed what they brought with them, were these 4 standards and sets of criteria for each of the standards. 2 of these have to do particularly with teaching and learning. One of them is called Achieving Educational Outcomes Through Core Functions. And guess what the core functions are? Teaching and learning. We've talked a lot about both already. Scholarship and creative activity, although what scholarship means for WASC is very broadly defined, and I'm using the term here professional work instead. Also student learning and success, and we're going to talk about each of these as it's folded into understanding how WASC now is interpreting faculty rules and what impact it's expected to have on our students. All right. The 4th standard from WASC is called Creating an Organization Committed to Quality Assurance, Institutional Learning, and Improvement. And that's another key standard that we're going to come back to because it fundamentally involves faculty. Faculty in terms of review, improvement, quality assurance, and governance. So these are key factors that WASC comes looking for when they come to do an accreditation visit or when they're looking at an institutional self-study. Okay.
I'm going to try to bring up
the images?
The slides that you sent me earlier in the week.
Ah, okay, great.
Will those work?
Yeah, I assume yours had the graphics on.
Okay. Can I have the jump drive?
Because they can't draw the pictures on the next one.
Can I have your jump drive?
Yeah, I know. How do I eject it? And this is.
Yeah.
Okay, so while we're trying to do that, what I'd like to do is explore with you what you would consider to be a traditional teaching model. Maybe the way you were taught or the way that you've seen teachers teach in the past many years. Yeah,
It's usually been described as sage on the stage.
yeah, exactly. That's a great phrase. What does it mean, sage on the stage?
Where somebody talks at people from their own knowledge rather than interacting.
Yeah, I don't know if any of you have had the experience of participating in a stadium-style class where there are maybe over 100 students. There's one professor down there on the stage, and that professor usually holds the floor for the majority of an hour, and or however long the class period exists. Now, there's nothing to say that lecture-based teaching is absolutely wrong and we should do away with it. In fact, sometimes you might read articles lately that make it sound that way. You know, like, oh my gosh, death to the lecture, let's get rid of everyone who does that. But in fact, we know that we've sat through lectures from very talented faculty who engage us, get us to think about whole problems, tell us stories, make us see the world in a different way, and get inspired, just like you were saying. That's what we're looking for. That's what we're hoping for when we attend a lecture. But WASC has challenged us. In fact, much of the research on engagement shows that when students are exposed just to lecture-based, when it's fairly passive, that not as great gains are made, knowledge-wise, as when the other strategies are employed. So what alternatives are there beyond sort of the traditional lectures?
You can flip the classroom around, so you do more minimal lecture and then give them experiences on the subject at hand. They form their own conclusions to the subject matter.
That's exactly right. You know, there are any number of webinars available to you today, or workshops where you can learn how to do just that, where you may put 2 or 3 goals for the day's activities, identify the key concepts that they were supposed to have covered by going online, looking at your course environment, reading through the materials for the day, right? And then during the bulk of class time is spent trying to achieve those goals. Now, I've worked with quite a few instructional designers, and I bet there's a whole range of you in this room who know that transitioning from a traditional classroom to an online environment you don't just pop from one into the other, right? That it takes real talent to be able to learn how to manipulate that kind of environment. That's not the only alternative, flipping the classroom. There's some people who swear by it and love it and think that, yeah, absolutely, the class is basically problem solution based, makes perfect sense that you would structure it that way. Others not so much. So what other alternatives exist to flipping?
I use a cognitive apprenticeship.
And how?
Cognitive apprenticeship.
And what do you
I tell, I model, they practice with a lot of supervision, then they practice minimal supervision.
That's great. And so in that first part, you would not only explain the process, but perhaps even model it, and then give them a trial so that they would be able to practice it, and then review with them how successful or not.
Yeah. And the third step is collaborative.
Okay. And what do you mean by collaborative?
I have students work in groups.
Yeah.
I encourage them to cheat if you would.
Yeah. So how many people in here have heard of the term high impact practice? That's a term that's very commonly used now in some circles in higher education, particularly with our accreditors, to get at meaning just exactly the kind of process that you're talking about. There are a number of indicators that they use. You named 3 of them right there. So collaboration is a huge one. Guided practice in a common intellectual environment. So you're creating this system where students are all on the same page, but you're also allowing them to discover it sort of at their own pace, right? And in their own way, and with help. Lots of support built in. So it sounds to me like you have a really good understanding of ways in which you can move, and that that supports a learning environment. So where are we with the slides? We're working on it. All right. So for traditional teaching, I had these 4 slides that showed, 3 of them showed lecture-based, right? And then the 4th one shows a slide that says, will this be on the test? Do we have to know this for the final? Will this be on the exam? Can you tell us what we need to know for the final? So one, which I actually got myself as a faculty member, a student came up to me and said, I was gone all last week. Was anything important covered? Yeah, right. So very often in that passive frame, that's how we think both of teaching and learning. You know, I sort of regurgitate out, give you all the information, and then you absorb it. You try to frame it from what you think so we get into this little guessing game of what you think I think is important to know. And then you memorize it just for the duration of the test, right? You test out and then promptly forget the majority of it, right? Well, in fact, it's been shown that the less engaged students are, the lower the retention, right? So if you do go out 2 months after class is over, you know, let alone 3 days after the final exam, right? But 2 months and then 6 months after, the decline is fairly precipitous about what students retain. Students tend to retain skill-based doing more than they do content knowledge alone. So when content knowledge is applied, that amount tends to go up. So it's very interesting to look at engagement, teaching and learning at the research and what that indicates. So, and you've identified some very great ways of getting away from traditional teaching. So I brought up a slide that said identify 3 challenges in teaching today. So I'm going to see if I can find a darker pen than this. You tell me. Oh, there's another black. Okay, what are some of the challenges in teaching?
Student motivation.
Yeah. Yep, what else? Well, what do you mean by student motivation? Just,
Motivating students.
okay. To pay attention, read the material, name it, right? What else?
Keeping the focus of the student.
Keeping students focused?
Yeah. Not just motivated, but paying attention.
What else?
Technology.
Yep. And I'm thinking that you mean not only just understanding the basics and how to do that, but keeping current with it as well.
I'm also thinking of the students' addictions to their cell phones.
There we go.
Getting in the way of understanding.
Keeping them focused.
Disruptive.
A social addiction.
Quit
Yeah,
chasing
definitely.
Pokemons.
Yeah, Pokemon Go. There's already Pokemon Go stories of people, well, you've probably seen them in our own news, walking off cliffs and,
Somebody walked off the cliff.
Wow.
Right.
With
Multiple
someone actually
people.
walk
yeah,
out.
exactly. How about some other challenges? How about this one?
Yeah.
How about this one? What life, right?
Probably because there's not enough time, the life interferes with the actual school time.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that there are only so many hours in a day and trying to keep all the balls in the air, juggling them. If you're at multiple institutions, that gets exacerbated, clearly. But just, you know, coming into the classroom, dropping into the classroom, engaging your students while you're here, getting them to think beyond the classroom in terms of their own application, their own lives, etc. Making sure that all of the tools, including technology, are there for use in terms of education, not just pleasure and entertainment, but then time and where you fit all of that in to do all of it is a key consideration. And it really has to be doable. It has to be in a way that makes it manageable.
10 minutes. Go ahead and postpone 4 hours.
We're not gonna restart it, right? Yeah, it goes about
Otherwise,
4
we'll-
hours. Yeah, I have listed here too some of the ones that a number of people listed in a Chronicle article, several Chronicle article staying current in rapidly changing fields, resources for professional development, increased accountability and transparency. Anybody know what that refers to? What does accountability mean? Institutional accountability. What do you know?
Students learning, students achieving the outcomes that you said.
Yeah, that's a very literal translation of it. It generally means that you gotta put your money where your mouth is, right? You have to be able to demonstrate or prove with evidence that you have achieved student learning the way that you've said it will occur at your institution. And that accountability and transparency clearly is something new on our radar, something that we've really been grappling with understanding and trying to come to terms with, not just from the outside, but why would we do it? Why is it important for us? Is it important for us? And if so, how do we do it in a way that is?
Would they consider placement numbers in that type of?
Absolutely, yeah, so where do your students go from here? We're gonna talk about, that is one of the key indicators of student success, right? All right. So I think teaching for today, we're really, in a mix of so many different, oh, hey, look at pictures. Yeah, let me go back. All right, so, and you've mentioned many of these. So project-based learning, inside and outside of the classroom, problem solving, the guided cognitive work that you have students do, all of these have become high on everyone's radars for engaging students and making classrooms much more proactive, less passive in design. All right, so evidence of learning. And learning really is considered the flip side of teaching. And one of the reasons that we have gone evidence-based began with a report by the Secretary of Education, Margaret Spellings, in 2006. I don't know whether that ever made it into your awareness, but it really revolutionized higher education. It was largely based on the high cost of education. And were students really getting what we said they were when they graduated from an institution of higher learning? And the challenge was that either we were or we weren't, that there was little evidence produced beyond grades and the conferral of degrees that students actually knew anything. And in fact, there was some amount of counter evidence that that was true. To graduate students out of public institutions where they had difficulty with even basic reading and writing skills, that the majority of students fared 27th, 28th in the world in terms of math, that we have slowly slipped in our own standards of what we think our students know, gave everyone pause and gave the Department of Education enough power from taxpayers to say, we expect that you will add that to what it means to become an accredited institution. So for the first time, really, the regional accrediting bodies were asked to prove that students knew something, and to do so in a very systematic way. So that's where the language student outcomes came from. It came out of the educational literature on what it is you could demonstrate students would know. You may have heard other terms for them. They're sometimes called objectives, for example, or goals. But the idea was the same. It was a statement that we provided about what students would specifically know when they finished a curriculum with us. And that's another interesting factor, because for the first time, they were really saying that your entire curriculum is at stake here. We don't want to know just what students are knowing in your individual classes that you can demonstrate with a final exam. We want to know what happens to your student over the course of a curricular program. So when they emerge on the other side, you should be able to demonstrate to us the added value of going through your program. What did they learn as a result of being with you all that time? Now, I don't know about you, but when I went to grad school, which is fast becoming ancient history in my case, no one ever taught me to think about the curriculum in my program. I thought about my classes. What did I have expertise in teaching? I was really focused on what it is I knew. and what I would be responsible for teaching in our curriculum. I was almost never asked to consider how my courses fit in to the program curriculum. But when this question got asked of institutions, that's when the shift happened. The shift happened to, okay, so how does what I do fit into, or does it, to everybody else, and what we're trying to achieve programmatically? And that became the real challenge. So I picked game design from your curricular catalogs to show that the sequence of COM 103 is a prerequisite for computer. Is it COM for computer? 203, and that the highest level would be a computer 293 class. Did I get that right? Okay. So in this scaffolding, I'm going to use that term there, it means that whatever happens here really should be integrated with this and integrated with the highest level. Now, that sounds simplistic. I mean, really, yeah, okay, we get that. Makes logical sense. Doing that is really tough. At least we figured out that it is hard, because it means having really tough conversations about the level here. Did they really get what we say they would here? Do I have to back up in 203 and cover some of the ground that I expected them to get in 103 before I can go on? When they leave, have I really given them a good preparation on what they're going to need in 293? And how do I know that? How can I be assured of that? In most cases, we can probably stand to improve that kind of scaffolding on a regular basis. But what that means is we should be talking to each other. And we should be talking to each other about specific things that students know at each level, which means thinking way beyond your own classroom. And I find this really challenging. However, some of the best conversations that I've had with my own colleagues have to do with this conversation. You know, I've taught a lot of basic introductory courses that served as foundation courses. Some of the best conversations I've had have been about, well, gee, when I teach them about speaking, presenting themselves, and basic writing skills really feed into what it is they needed to know to go on. And it wasn't always true for all faculty alike, so it meant thinking systematically, what were some of the ways that could happen, could change. If it weren't showing up just in my class, but in other classes also teaching the basic level, then we looked at the curriculum again, the way that we had designed it. So I'm telling you that in most cases, we've had conversations that go way beyond my classroom. And those have been interesting. They've led to my changing around the way that I think about my assignments and what I try to accomplish. And I actually now talk about, well, when you take so-and-so, you know, some of the material you're going to get will look like this, and when you advance to so-and-so, so that I really know better, because I've talked to those colleagues, what is that they're going to try to cover. And that too is challenging, but it's also very useful. It also lets me know what I don't have to cover, which I find really, really helpful. Instead of trying to just cast a net out there and hope that I'm targeting key outcomes or key objectives that we all share, then this is a much more targeted, specific approach. All right. So for the evidence of learning, the key terms that you're going to hear, and you probably hear these again and again from people already in your institution, certainly through the accreditation process, outcomes. And outcomes have to do with knowledge, skills, and attitudes or dispositions, so beyond just knowledge and skills. Sometimes they have to do with valuing the process, so being able to critique society, for example, or critique a social design, critique industrial design in a particular way, moves them beyond just pure skillfulness. Scaffolding we talk about, and then evidence of outcome achievement. And you're going to hear a lot of times, oh, it's not the same thing as grades. That's true. Grades are not the same thing as outcome achievement. Why? Well, for a big reason. We've just been talking about it. Outcome achievement is a collective conversation that you have about a program that leads to rethinking, yeah, what are those outcomes at both a course and program level and even institutional level. But grades are useful too, for Pete's sake. They let you know your own standards for what it is you're expecting students to achieve. So, yeah, they are useful too. Curricular assignments, projects, portfolios, graduation, and now one of the outcomes that actually have been added, which you pointed to, was placement or employment. So how successfully are your students employed when they graduate? So, how many people in here actually use portfolios? Do students use portfolios at all?
We encourage them to use portfolios more and more so.
Okay. And do you have a tool for it? Is it something that's built in, or is it sort of an optional add-on, or how does it work?
Currently, it's optional, and we're trying to progress where it's part of the grade, part of the course. So we're trying to convert some of the classes to have mandatory creation of portfolio requirements.
Yeah, one of the great advantages of a portfolio is that students it becomes a repository of student work, so that you too can go back and take a look at what students have produced over time. It's a very useful place to go back and sort of review where students are thinking. Oftentimes, too, portfolios have been used when you have projects that span classes. So, do your students produce products or projects, creative projects outside of the classroom that are for any kind of innovative clubs or organizations? I don't want to pick on you, but yeah, I see you nodding, so.
We have game jams, and we have other events here too. I think there's another one, Pro Jam too.
Robotics club.
Yeah, robotics
Right.
club, and the
Okay.
cybersecurity club.
Yeah.
So we encourage the students to produce their own work.
All right. So oftentimes, if you're using that kind of a project as a basis for understanding where students are at, it can be very useful to be complemented with a portfolio or not. But it's clear evidence that your students are producing beyond just a classroom experience, and is a great way to evidence what your students know beyond just the classroom level. So, and how it gets at all that wonderful creativity that students bring to their work, and that you help foster in it too. So thinking as we're talking about students and what the problems are with engaging them, that some of what we're talking about are new ways to approach understanding what it is they're learning, and then how to engage them around items like projects. Problem solving is a huge part of project development. Portfolios as a display of multiple levels of learning that are possible. Okay. Okay, so I don't see anything on this slide. So apparently these are not shown. Professional work as who's the provider. I'm going to list the terms up here. So, and thinking about the professional work that you do, what are some of the things that you might consider part of your own professionalism, your own professional development that you do?
Conferences.
Conferences, big one, yep. What else?
Webinars.
Yep.
Writing.
Writing? Yeah, absolutely.
Freelance work.
So consulting,
Yeah.
Your own research.
research, yep.
Getting certifications.
Mm-hmm. Getting certified,
Mentoring outside of school.
yeah. What else? Yeah, so any kind of networking that you do, any kind of professional organizations that you belong to, in addition to all of the materials that you consume, certainly. The next slide is about you as the recipient and you as the provider. So think about both in terms of your professional work. You certainly engage in doing professional work whenever you network, whenever you're doing consulting, whenever you do mentoring work with your students. All of that counts as producing professionalism that I think sometimes we overlook too. So professional organizations, memberships, professional communities, industry and community partners. It looks to me as if you have a fairly successful placement ability. So you're networked with many partners in the community, and that networking counts a great deal, not just for your own professional development, but as a real connector for your students. And so that too is part of your professional work, and something that you would be asked to demonstrate if you go through the accreditation process. And it clearly becomes part of a review process too. So what am I doing as a provider? Do I produce webinars? Have I given a webinar? As well as the ones that I participate in the conferences that I go to. And that's the next slide too. So you as the recipient would be all of the ones that you've mentioned. So any kind of continuing or advanced degree prep that you do, any certification that you get, all of that counts. And it could be as simple as attending a symposium, and it could be that you actually do accreditation training at some point. So if you're thinking about even going again as submitting an application for accreditation, or there's specific certification, sometimes there's training that's involved for that as well. WASC has many opportunities in that direction. All right. Questions on webinars so far? So now we really have two of those areas that I erased down. We've talked about teaching and learning. And it's flip side learning. And then professional work. And again, the two sides of this would be what you provide and what you receive, what you take in, how you get more qualified. And the last area under concern is service. All right. Now, I bring up this term because, again, it is an accreditation term. It's something that our accreditors look to see what is we're actually providing, or how it is we understand our duties to involve whatever it is we do beyond professional work and beyond just teaching and learning within the classroom. So when you're talking about mentoring students, when you meet with them outside of the classroom, when you engage with them on any kind of project, when you yourself have spent hours and hours just thinking about how you might help students in an organization, all of that counts as service. And there's another aspect of this too. So what guarantees student success is considered service from accrediting points of view. That means that beyond advising, one of the things that we look for in service is, how do you assure quality? Oops. So quality assurance, so that you guarantee success. How many people have heard quality assurance? What do you think it means, quality assurance? When you've heard it, how's it being used?
I heard it in a surveillance plan where you had to check to see that they met the requirement, exceed the requirement.
Okay, so that the method, can you say it one more time?
I administered quality assurance plan where I had to evaluate and make sure that the program had met the requirement or exceeded the requirement.
That's right. So whatever the requirements are, whatever the indicators that a requirement is being met, you had to make sure that those in fact were met, and that's an assurance that the quality was achieved, right? Yeah.
You could also say the flip side of that is also you're always looking for flaws, a continuous
That's right. Why?
Because you want to fix them.
Yeah. And when you surface several of them, then oftentimes quality assurance is the process of trying to prioritize them. Tell which ones are more urgent, either because of magnitude or because of some kind of primacy, right? Got to take care of this before you take care of that. So yeah, it's in fact called continuous improvement. You know, I think what I'm trying to do is make you aware that so many of the buzzwords that we hear from accrediting agencies and in higher ed today are all about these kinds of processes. So continuous improvement is huge on everyone's radar. The first one is getting outside of our classrooms to talk to each other. And then the second is trying to make sure that the outcomes that we say we're achieving, we are collectively, because now we're talking to each other. And it's programmatic, not class-based. And the third one is this, that now that we're talking to each other and we can see what needs to be improved, that we have some kind of systematic plan in place for doing that. And all of that is part of a clear institutional process that is considered critically important at this point. Gets back right back to Spellman's challenge, right, in 2006. Do you have evidence that you say that your students are doing what you predicted they would? And then how do you assure that that process will happen again and again and again in some kind of continuous cycle? That's not simple. That's not an easy task. That means not only do I have to have this one conversation with you to figure out whether my class syncs with your class, I have to keep doing it, right? And I have to figure out how to do it in a way that won't drive me so crazy that you can just throw that time, life, work balance out the window. But the more I see institutions engage in this kind of activity, the better I think the results are that we achieve. We first started at my own institution doing program review in 2009, not that long ago. Not that long ago. And programs kicking and screaming, do we have to do this? Why do we have to do this? And after about the first few programs, really not many, a handful, information started coming back from those faculty to other faculty that, wow, you know what, we actually found out some stuff that we're using. We came up with a plan. We came up with some ideas about how to move forward. So it stopped being less about us showing some person out there, some accrediting agency, what we were worth, and more about what we needed to do, what we wanted to see happen. And it wasn't a fast process. I mean, it would have been great if we all went embracing into the world of program review, but we certainly didn't. We needed proof ourselves that this really counted, that it made a difference. So let's talk about service. So service is quality assurance. And I'm going to suggest that a big, huge part of quality assurance, that service part, making sure that we do have a continuous improvement, is this idea of program review. Now, all the pieces that I've been talking about together are going to come out in this process I'm calling program review. And because you can talk about teaching and learning, you can talk about professional work, and you can talk about all the service that you do, but unless it comes together in some kind of process that leads to real resource needs that you have, that your students have, that the institutions have, then it really doesn't go anywhere. And so that's what I want to talk with you about, because I think that's such a critical role that faculty play today, and especially on behalf of their students. Program review. Now, this program review that you see identified up here, this particular process, is a process that we certainly use at USD. It's a process that I've seen repeated over and over again because it's primarily based on law standards. And so for accredited agencies, it has this sort of understanding that this is a complete process. So let's talk about it for a minute. Stage one is reflection through self-study. And this is the one that I was talking with you about where faculty just, no. We're talking about a lot more work. But a self-study is really interesting. A self-study has the possibility of covering in great detail the key components of any program. In the self-study, WASC asks that you focus on learning, on the curriculum, on student support, and faculty support. So in this self-study, you get to provide all the evidence that you have for showing, yeah, we scaffolded the curriculum, we're having those conversations, you can show that if you complete this class and you go on to that class, you're making those specific achievements. But then it goes on to look at what you need in terms of faculty and students as well. So how are students accepted and how do they come into your program? How are faculty guided and supported through that process? And how are they lined up with the curriculum? So are you really teaching in an area that you've been asked to teach in, etc. So these are key components of who we say we are as an institution, institutional identity. But then there's another part, and that's program sustainability. And here, two key areas that are explored are resources and viability. So what's the competition look like for the program? If we just did a program on cybersecurity, how many other institutions, either online or in the area, are going to compete with us for the same program, right? Also, resources. What do we need to keep the other four healthy? So what do faculty need in order to keep the day-to-day operation of the classroom at very high quality? What do we need in terms of student support, etc.? Yeah.
So who conducts those self-study, the faculty or the deans?
It's a combination. So the faculty, and that works from institution to institution. So primarily in some programs, and even at my institution, there's variation. So very often a program department chair may take the lead in the self-study, but often relies on the faculty to provide some information for at least sometimes help in the writing of, etc., or the research around. All right. So yeah.
How do you measure sustainability? Is there some threshold that you need to reach or a timeline that has to be?
So there are no set standards, but it would be reasonable to take a look at some comparable programs if they do exist, or comparable institutions, and take a look at some of the things that they've offered, how they might have scaled back, or what it is they might offer to you in terms of guidance, right? For thinking about where to go. I mentioned cybersecurity. If you've developed a new program and you know that 2 or 3 others are popping up elsewhere, then it would be of great use to take a look at what the contents are of those programs and think about deliverability. What are we trying to accomplish here? How is it different than those programs? How is it the same? Do we want to use that kind of curriculum elsewhere to help us change or think about how we might make differences in our own? Or maybe it reinforces the fact that we aren't going to do that or go there, right? And then it helps us understand and give overt, explicit rationale for why we're making the choices that we're making. And that's really an important thing. A self-study becomes an argument for your program based on evidence. That's what an argument is. It's saying, here's what our program looks like, and this is how we demonstrate that this is what it looks like. And this is what we want to assure going forward. We believe this is the best for our program going forward. All right, so does it end there? No, the second stage is an external review process. And this has a lot of variation depending on your institution. Some people have external reviewers come from campus to your campus, from another campus to your campus, physically. Some people have just one reviewer come, some people have a couple. Some accrediting agencies in other fields, specific fields, may send a whole team, which I think, yeah, it's crazy to support. But many institutions will have one or two reviewers. Some have them not actually come to campus. So they review all the materials virtually. They may actually do some phone interviews or Skype interviews, and they've set up in very different ways. All of those kinds of review are meant to do approximately the same kind of thing. And that is give you an outside viewer's perspective on what it is you're trying to accomplish with your program. So you've just made this huge argument about this is who we are, this is the evidence that we have, this is what we think we need going forward. And this external reviewer, that whole purpose is to come in and say, makes sense to me, or I don't think you've thought about this, you gotta think about this too, or think about this instead. It's a real challenge often to an existing perspective. So they help you in that way, guide you, both in terms of what to think about beyond what you're thinking about, and also to help confirm or affirm that what you have in place is indeed very defensible in terms of a quality curriculum. This external review usually ends in a report of some kind to the institution. I would say that, in the vast majority that we've done now, we've done over almost 50 reviews at this point, that in the process of those reviews, most programs say that they found this process so enlightening, that the people came on board, were sincere, that they really did a good job in most cases, did their homework, and really helped take it to the next level for most programs. The third stage has to do with some kind of internal review. Yeah, an internal review. This too varies a great deal by institution. But what it means is that there's some kind of way that once the program has done their self-study and gotten an external review, that the program sits down with administration and figures out what the substance was that came from the review. Sometimes this stage is accomplished with the next one, which is recommendations and planning. So sometimes these are linked on the same stage. But what this means is that all of what you found in terms of your findings go forward as recommendations to be discussed in terms of planning strategies. So at UST, we have a 6-year plan that we implement, which means that we have programs go through a projected 6-year planning process. Not everything that programs think of in their self-study makes it onto the plan, along with the reviewers and talking with administration. The program comes to an understanding of what kinds of things should receive priorities over the next 6 years. And obviously those are always constrained by financial responsibilities and obligations. So it means, though, that this kind of a process guarantees real input on the part of programs, and usually that includes both faculty and students and some of the administrators that support it, in that discussion for what makes the most sense in terms of planning. Does this make it into strategic planning? That's the goal. And in fact, I can tell you, if you pass accreditation from WASC, that's the key point that they'll be looking for. That the results of your program review not just give you a clear idea, or a clearer idea of what it is you're all doing, and that you're progressing, but how you will progress and how institutionally that progress will be supported. So you can see that in this process, quality is assured, and it's not assured just by the caliber of students you bring in, but by every faculty who participates in the program, by the administrators who lead on it, and then through the review process to come to some level of agreement about how to best move forward. Yeah.
In terms of the external review process, is there a WAS, a preferred external review board, group, association that's commonly used, or who we look for in an external review first?
So it depends on, again, the kind of program that you have. If you are board certified, if at the end of your training, students get certified in the process, then often there's an external agency that supports that certification process. And then it makes sense for WAS to look at what that certification agency demands first, right? And to make sure you meet it. But it could be that, you don't have that kind of, set of standards or an external agency that's imposing that kind of structure. What WAS looks for is that you make a good argument for the people you're going to bring on board, because they help you understand your program as it exists. So, to pick someone from a common kind of an institution, similar kind of an institution that would help you understand where you are, or from an aspirant one. So it's not so aspiring that it's, out of reach, but someone who might recommend next steps or how to get to the next level. Other questions?
So do you recommend having an external reviewer before the internal review?
So usually the program and the administrator, often the dean and the program itself, go through the self-study process, and that's a huge internal review, right? Mm-hmm. So everyone's engaged in that. They're usually talking back and forth about what they're finding. Very often faculty who produce a self-study make sure it gets circulated to everyone. Everyone signs off on it and says, yeah, can't think of anything else we can add. And then it goes forward. So there's that program internal review first. And then as it moves forward, it's that next internal review is meant to
it's
make
more
sure.
Of a wrap-up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next level. And that's because you want to make sure everyone's on the same page, right? And that's key for planning, because oftentimes planning strategies are sometimes not operating at the same level of understanding programs that a program self-study and an external review will really produce. Other comments? Okay, so in your case, I have just one slide that I wanted to suggest. You have a university planning cycle. It looks to me that from Coleman 60, the World Cafe as another strategy. Someone tell me what the World Cafe is. A couple people have already told me, but I'd like to hear it again. It's not a process that I'm familiar with. What's the World Cafe?
You set up different stations. Each station has a problem it's trying to solve. People
Okay.
rotate to those stations, and they talk about the problem.
Okay. Yeah, I could see the possibility of a World Cafe, which I think is a great working design for, exploring a complex process like this. So how you might envision each of the stages might be a useful way to do it. You have a strategic plan and a university planning committee, and I've seen the number of projects. It looks to me like a number of faculty are involved in a number of the projects that are identified for this year, along with administrators. And as I looked through them, it seemed to me that many of the projects that have been identified fold right into this process very easily, become part of that cycle, and looking at student success and looking at student learning, etc. And certainly all the accreditation ones, it fits the projects there. So projects, retention and graduation, student learning, and accreditation, all of those sets of goals that exist currently in the projects you have planned. would be affiliated with this process. And it looks to me like faculty are involved in each of at least those three. So, is that correct? Okay. So the plan is there. I think figure out how to best engage it and put it into play so it makes sense for you, makes sense for the institution. Absolutely is the way to go forward. So last thing is a recap of the view. Ha! There it is. See? My graphic showed up in this one finally. Is that circle again. And again, we believe that quality assurance is a process that is guaranteed through program review, and that those are the key elements that are looked at. Teaching / learning, professional work, both as provider and consumer, and then service. How you contribute to that overall process of assuring quality. So really key. And boy, now I never hear complaints about why do we have to do program review. It's when, now it's when. And now we have posted cycles and everyone just puts it on their planning routine and knows it's happening. They often know that when they have a big resource need that's coming up, that is part of the plan or it will become part of the plan, and there's a way to flag it now that is an institutional part of the process. And I think that's a really healthy environment, one that I really enjoy participating in when I act as a reviewer and go either to institutions at the institutional level or at programmatic levels. That you can step in at the institution then at any level and begin to see what makes it tick, how it works, and how you might make the process work for you specifically. So other questions? Okay. Now, one last wait. Why would you want to be accredited? Anyone know? Why this big deal about accreditation? What happens if you get to be accredited?
Government money.
Money! You get money, that's right. Not only that, but you get to put down accreditation as your status to almost every other institution. It becomes your reputation. It becomes integrity around that reputation. You have it already, so demonstrate it. And it becomes visible to everybody else. And that reputation means that you can also set up links, curricular links to transfer institutions that don't exist now, that require that the transfer comes from an accredited or to an accredited body. So there's so many advantages. I do want to put a little plug in there for you to consider this process. And if this is the way to get there, I think it has great benefits for you individually, as a faculty member and also as part of this institution. So thank you very much again.